I knew I didn't belong the moment the laughter got louder when I walked in. The champagne in my hand tasted flat, like it had lost its sparkle the second I stepped into that ballroom, like it knew something I didn't want to admit, and maybe it was the way their eyes lingered a second too long or the way whispers seemed to follow me across polished marble floors, but I felt it in my chest, that tight, suffocating pressure, like I was standing in a room where everyone had already decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth, and I told myself to breathe, to smile, to pretend I wasn't the girl who worked double shifts just to afford a dress that still didn't quite fit into this world, but the mirrors on the walls reflected everything too clearly, every doubt, every hesitation, every reminder that I was out of place, and when Daniel finally appeared beside me, adjusting his cufflinks like this was just another business deal instead of our wedding day, I searched his face for something steady, something that said I wasn't alone in this, but all I found was distance, like he was already somewhere else, somewhere safer, somewhere I wasn't invited, and then it started, quiet at first, a comment from his aunt about my shoes, not designer, she said it like it was a diagnosis, like something was wrong with me, and another voice chimed in about my background, the way they said background like it was a stain that couldn't be washed out, and I felt the heat rise to my face, my fingers tightening around the glass as if I could hold myself together just by not letting go, and Daniel didn't say anything, not when they laughed, not when his mother stepped forward with that tight smile and those cold eyes that never once softened toward me. This is a mistake, she said, not even lowering her voice, not even pretending this wasn't meant to be heard. You don't belong in this family, and the room didn't gasp, didn't react, it just absorbed her words like they were expected, like everyone had been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. And I looked at Daniel again, waiting, hoping, begging without words for him to choose me, just once, just here, but he exhaled slowly, like I was the problem he didn't want to deal with tonight, and that was when something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet realization settling deep in my bones that I had walked into a place that was never meant to hold me, and I set the glass down before my hands could start shaking, before they could see how close I was to breaking, and I turned toward the exit, each step heavier than the last, heels clicking against the floor like a countdown, like the final seconds of something I didn't know how to save, and the music kept playing, soft and elegant, completely indifferent to the way my world was folding in on itself, and just as I reached the doors, just as I told myself that leaving quietly was the only dignity I had left, the room shifted, not in sound but in presence, like the air itself had changed, like something unseen had entered and demanded attention without asking for it, and the doors opened before I could touch them, slow, deliberate, and every conversation faded into nothing, every whisper cut off mid-breath, and I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to, because I felt it, that weight, that silence, that kind of power that didn't need to announce itself to be known, and for the first time that night, the room wasn't looking at me with amusement or judgment, it was looking past me, at someone else, someone who had just walked into my collapse like it was exactly where he was meant to be. I turned slowly, not because I wanted to, but because something in the room demanded it, like gravity had shifted and I was no longer standing where I thought I was. And when I finally saw him, I understood why no one was speaking, why even Daniel's mother had gone silent mid-breath, because the man standing just inside those doors did not look like someone who entered a room, he looked like someone a room rearranged itself around, tall, composed, his silver hair catching the chandelier light in a way that made him seem carved rather than human, his suit perfectly tailored, not flashy, not loud, just precise, like everything about him had been decided long before tonight, and his eyes, when they moved across the crowd, did not rush, did not hesitate, they simply observed, like he already knew what he would find, and I felt it before it happened, that moment when his attention landed on me, not curious, not surprised, just certain, and I forgot how to move, forgot how to breathe properly, because for the first time that night, I was not being measured against something I lacked. I was being seen in a way that felt almost too direct, too clear, and it unsettled me more than the laughter ever had, because I did not understand it, and the silence stretched, thick and heavy, until someone finally spoke, Daniel's mother again, her voice softer now, careful, like she was stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Mr. DeLuca, we did not expect you, and there it was, a name that moved through the room like a quiet current, people straightening, shifting, recalculating their posture, their tone, their place, and I realized this was not just a guest. This was someone who changed the rules simply by being present, and he did not respond immediately, did not acknowledge her attempt to reclaim control. He just kept walking, slow, deliberate steps across the polished floor, each one echoing in the silence like a statement, and I felt every inch of distance closing between us as if it mattered, as if something irreversible was happening and I was the only one who did not understand why. And when he stopped in front of me, the world narrowed in a way that made everything else fade, the music, the guests, even Daniel standing somewhere behind me. None of it felt real compared to the weight of that gaze, and for a second, just 1 second, I thought I saw something flicker there, not emotion exactly, but recognition, like a memory trying to surface, and his eyes dropped briefly to my hands, to the simple silver bracelet I had worn for years without thinking, the only thing I had kept from a life that no one here cared to know about, and his expression shifted so slightly that anyone else might have missed it, but I felt it, that change, that decision forming in real time, and then he looked back at me, steady, unwavering, like he had already reached a conclusion I had not been given the chance to question, and behind him, I could hear whispers starting again, cautious now, uncertain, people trying to understand what this meant, what he would do, because clearly he had not come here by accident, and my heart began to race, not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming sense that something had just aligned in a way I could not control. And I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was going to say, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, something to fill the silence before it swallowed me whole, but no words came, because the truth was I had no idea what was happening anymore, only that the man standing in front of me had just stepped into the moment I was trying to escape, and instead of letting me disappear, he was looking at me like leaving was no longer an option. The silence did not break all at once, it fractured, slowly, unevenly, like no one in that room was sure who had the right to speak first anymore, and I felt it in the way the air shifted, in the way every set of eyes moved between him and me, waiting for something, anything, to define what this moment meant, and I realized with a quiet, unsettling clarity that I was no longer invisible, no longer the mistake they had been so eager to erase. I had become the center of something I did not understand, and it made my pulse unsteady, my thoughts scattered, because I had not chosen this. I had been trying to leave, to disappear with whatever dignity I could salvage, and now I was standing here, held in place by a gaze that did not allow escape, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, it did not need to be, it carried through the room with a calm certainty that made everything else feel distant. "You were leaving," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement that felt like it had already been decided, and I swallowed, forcing myself to find my voice even though it felt smaller than it ever had. "I did not think I was wanted here," I answered, the truth slipping out before I could soften it, and something in his expression shifted again, not sympathy, not exactly, but a recognition of something deeper than the words themselves, and behind me I heard Daniel move, a step forward, hesitant, like he was trying to reclaim a place he had already given up. "This is a private matter," he said, his tone tight, controlled, but lacking the weight it needed to carry authority in a room that had already shifted away from him, and the man in front of me did not even look in his direction at first, did not acknowledge him the way one would expect, as if Daniel had become irrelevant in a moment that no longer belonged to him, and when his attention finally moved, it was brief, measured, enough to remind everyone exactly where the balance of power now stood, before returning to me as if that was the only place that mattered, and I felt my breath catch, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that I was being placed into something I had not agreed to, something larger than this room, larger than this night, and I did not know how to resist it, because no one else seemed willing to stand between us, not Daniel, not his family, not a single person who had so easily judged me minutes ago, and the realization settled heavy in my chest, that their voices had disappeared the second his presence replaced them, that their opinions no longer held weight, and it should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like standing at the edge of something unknown, something irreversible, and he took one step closer, just enough to close the space I had been clinging to, not threatening, not forceful, just inevitable, like this had always been where he was going to stand, and his eyes did not waver, did not soften, but they did not dismiss me either, and that was what unsettled me most, because for the first time that night, I was not being reduced to something smaller, I was being considered, fully, completely, and I did not know what to do with that kind of attention. Then you were wrong, he said quietly, each word deliberate, controlled, like he was placing them exactly where they needed to be, and the room seemed to hold its breath again, waiting for what would come next, waiting for him to define the reality we were all now standing in, and I realized in that moment that whatever he said, whatever he decided, it would not just change how they saw me, it would change what I was allowed to be, and I was not sure if I should be grateful or afraid, because both felt equally possible as I stood there, caught between the life I had just tried to walk away from and the one that was about to be placed in front of me whether I was ready or not. For a moment, no one moved, not even the servers who had been gliding silently between tables just minutes ago, not even Daniel who now stood a few feet behind me like a man who had lost his place in his own story, and I felt the weight of every eye in that room pressing in, waiting, expecting, as if the next word spoken would redraw the entire scene, and the man in front of me did not rush it, did not fill the silence just to ease it, he let it stretch until it became something solid. Something undeniable, and when he finally turned, it was not toward me but toward the crowd, toward the people who had decided who I was without hesitation, and his expression did not harden, it did not need to, there was already something unshakable in the way he carried himself, something that made the room listen before he even spoke, and when he reached for the microphone resting near the edge of the stage, the small, almost ordinary movement felt louder than any raised voice, because it meant he was about to define this moment in a way no one else could undo, and I felt my breath catch as he lifted it, as the soft feedback hum briefly filled the air before disappearing into silence again, and I wanted to step back, to interrupt, to say something that would return control to something familiar, but my feet would not move, because a part of me already knew that whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with what I wanted, it had already been decided the moment he walked in. And behind me, I heard a faint protest, Daniel's voice again, quieter now, strained. "This is unnecessary," he said, but even he did not sound convinced, and no one echoed him, no one supported him, because the balance had shifted too far, too quickly, and the man holding the microphone did not look at him, did not acknowledge the objection, he simply let it fade into nothing like everything else that no longer mattered, and then his gaze returned to me, steady, deliberate, and for a second it felt like the entire room had disappeared, like it was just the two of us standing in the middle of something I could not step away from, and when he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly, not loud, not forced, just certain. "You have all made your assumptions," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational, but every word landed with a weight that silenced even the smallest whisper, and I felt something tighten in my chest, because this was not just about me anymore, this was about what they had done, what they had allowed, and for the first time that night, I was not the one being judged, they were, and it shifted something deep inside me, something fragile but real, and he took a breath, not for effect, not for drama, just a pause that gave his next words space to settle before they were even spoken, and I realized with a quiet, overwhelming clarity that this was the moment everything would change, not gradually, not gently, but completely, and I did not know if I was ready for it, did not know if I could even understand it, but I could not stop it either, and his eyes did not leave mine as he spoke again, slower now, more deliberate. "She does belong here," he said, and the words did not just contradict what had been said before, they erased it, replaced it, redefined it entirely, and I felt my pulse surge, my thoughts scatter, because I had never heard those words spoken about me in a room like this, never seen them accepted so quickly, so completely, and before anyone could respond, before anyone could question it, he finished the sentence in a way that made the entire room still, "Because she is mine now," and the silence that followed was not confusion, not disbelief, it was something deeper, something final, like the decision had already settled into place and no one there was willing to challenge it, and I stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, because in the span of a few seconds, everything I thought I was walking away from had been replaced by something I did not choose, but could no longer deny. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and absolute, like they had always been waiting to be said, and for a second I thought I had imagined them, that I had misheard something in the way the silence wrapped around us, but then I saw it, the shift in every face around me, the way Daniel's mother stiffened, the way the guests avoided looking directly at either of us as if acknowledging what had just happened would make it even more real, and my heart started to race in a way that had Nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fact that my reality had just been rewritten in front of an entire room that had already decided I was nothing, and I should have stepped back, should have corrected him, should have said something to reclaim whatever control I still had, but the truth was I did not know how to respond to a declaration that powerful, not when it had already erased every insult, every whisper, every judgment in a single sentence, and I could feel it in the way the room no longer looked at me with dismissal but with something else, something closer to caution, maybe even respect, and it unsettled me because it meant their opinions had never been about me, they had always been about power, about who had the right to define my place, and now that right had shifted, completely and without warning, and I swallowed, forcing myself to look at him, to find something in his expression that would tell me this was a mistake, that this was temporary, but there was nothing uncertain there, nothing careless, just a calm certainty that made it clear he did not take back what he had just claimed, and that realization sent a quiet wave of disbelief through me, because I was not something to be claimed, not by him, not by anyone, and yet here I was, standing in a room where no one questioned it, not even Daniel, who finally stepped forward again, his voice tighter now, edged with something that sounded like frustration but lacked the strength to challenge what had already been established. You cannot just say something like that, he said, but even as he spoke, it felt like the words were already fading, already losing their weight, and the man beside me turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him this time, and there was no anger in that glance, no irritation, just a quiet dismissal that was somehow more final than any argument could have been, and Daniel stopped, actually stopped, like he understood in that instant that he had already lost something he had never fully held onto, and I felt a strange pull in my chest, not toward him, but away from everything that had led me here. Because for the first time I saw it clearly, the hesitation, the silence, the way he had let me stand alone when it mattered, and it made something inside me settle, not painfully, not dramatically, just a quiet acceptance that whatever I thought I was losing had already been gone long before tonight, and I exhaled slowly, my shoulders easing in a way I had not noticed until now. And when I looked back at the man who had changed everything with a single sentence, I realized he was still watching me, not the room, not the reactions, just me, like my response was the only thing that mattered in a moment everyone else was too afraid to interrupt, and I found my voice, softer than I expected but steady enough to carry. You do not even know me, I said, not as a challenge, not as a rejection, but as a truth that needed to exist between us before anything else could, and something shifted in his expression again, subtle but unmistakable, like he had been waiting for that exact response, like it confirmed something he already believed, and he stepped closer, not invading, not forcing, just closing the distance enough that his voice did not need to carry beyond me this time. I know enough, he said quietly, and the simplicity of it unsettled me more than anything else he had done, because it meant this was not impulsive, not reckless, it was intentional, and I did not know whether that made it better or worse as I stood there, caught between the life I had just been pushed out of and the one that had just been placed in front of me without asking for my permission. His words should have unsettled me more than they did, but instead they lingered, quiet and steady, like something I could not immediately reject, and I hated that part of me wanted to understand what he meant, wanted to ask how someone like him could look at someone like me and say he knew enough, because no one had ever said that before without hesitation or condition, and the room was still watching, still waiting. But now the attention felt different, heavier, like I was no longer something to dismiss but something to calculate around, and I realized I was standing at the center of a shift I did not control, a shift that had already changed how every person here would remember this night, and I felt the urge to step back again, to create space, to remind myself that I still had a choice in whatever this was becoming. But when I moved, even just half a step, his gaze followed, not stopping me, not forcing me to stay, just present, just aware, and it made me pause, because there was something in that restraint that felt more powerful than any demand could have been, and behind me, the faint clink of glass, the shuffle of movement, the quiet attempts of people trying to return to something normal, but it did not work. The atmosphere had already changed too much, and I could feel it in the way no one spoke too loudly, no one laughed too freely, like the entire room had been reminded that control did not belong to them. And I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing against the bracelet at my wrist without thinking, grounding myself in something familiar, something that had existed long Before this moment, and his eyes followed the movement again, just briefly, just enough to make me notice, and there it was, that same flicker, that same unspoken recognition that I still did not understand, and it made my chest tighten, because whatever he saw there, whatever he believed it meant, it was shaping everything that was happening now, and I needed to know why. What is this really about? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, because I refused to let this moment carry me without answers, refused to let myself become something defined by someone else's decision without at least understanding it, and for the first time, he did not respond immediately, his gaze holding mine as if weighing something, as if deciding how much to reveal in a room that was not meant to hear it, and I realized then that this was not just about power, not just about stepping in and rewriting a scene, there was something else beneath it, something more deliberate, more personal, and it unsettled me in a way I could not ignore, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, meant only for me, but it carried just enough for the silence around us to hold it. It is about timing, he said, and I frowned slightly, because that was not an answer, not one that made sense in the moment, and he continued, just enough to deepen the confusion instead of clearing it, and about something that should not have been overlooked, and my mind raced, trying to connect something, anything, but there was nothing clear, nothing that explained why a man like him would walk into this moment and claim me in front of everyone, and yet the certainty in his voice made it impossible to dismiss as random, and I shook my head slightly, more to myself than to him, because I needed something concrete, something I could hold on to. That does not explain why you said that, I said, quieter now, because this was no longer about the room, no longer about them, it was about understanding what I had just been pulled into, and he studied me for a second longer, not impatient, not dismissive, just calm in a way that made it clear he was not rushing this, not treating it as something temporary, and then he spoke again, just one sentence, but it landed with more weight than everything else combined, because you were never meant to leave here alone, and something in my chest shifted, not fully understanding, not fully believing, but no longer able to pretend this was something simple, because whatever this was, it had already started long before tonight, and I was only just beginning to realize it. His words did not answer my question, not in the way I wanted, but they settled somewhere deeper than logic, somewhere I could not easily argue against, and I felt it in the way my thoughts slowed instead of racing, like a part of me had already stopped trying to push this away, and that realization unsettled me more than anything else, because I had always been the one to hold my ground, to question, to resist when something did not make sense, but standing here, in front of him, I felt that certainty slipping, not because he demanded it, but because he did not, and that difference mattered more than I wanted to admit, and I became aware again of the room around us. The way people were pretending to return to their conversations, their glasses, their roles, but every movement felt careful, measured, like no one wanted to draw attention back to what had just happened, and I understood then that this moment was not fading, it was settling into place, becoming something permanent in the memory of everyone here, and that meant there was no going back to what this night had been before, no quiet exit, no simple explanation that would undo what he had said, and I felt the weight of that truth press against me. Not suffocating, but undeniable, and I turned slightly, just enough to see Daniel again, still standing where I had left him, his expression caught somewhere between frustration and disbelief, like he was trying to understand how everything had shifted without his permission, and for a second, I searched his face for something, anything that would make me hesitate, that would make me question stepping away from what I had thought was my future, but there was nothing there, no conviction, no fight. Just a quiet resignation that made the decision easier than it should have been, and I realized then that I was not losing anything real, I was simply seeing it clearly for the first time, and that clarity steadied me in a way I had not expected, and when I turned back, he was still there, still watching me with that same composed focus, like he had given me space to decide, like he was waiting for me to reach a conclusion on my own, and it struck me then, suddenly and sharply, that this was not about taking something from me. It was about offering something I did not yet understand, and that difference changed everything, even if I could not fully explain why, and I lifted my chin slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation this time, because if I was going to stand in this moment, I needed to do it on my own terms, not just react to his. And what happens if I say no? I asked, not defiantly, not softly, just honestly, because I needed to know if this choice was real or if it had already been decided for me, and for the first time since he walked in, something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of his expression, not amused, not mocking, just acknowledging the question as if it was exactly what he had expected, and he answered without hesitation, his voice steady, certain. Then nothing changes, he said, and I felt a flicker of surprise at that, because it was not what I expected, not a warning, not a challenge, just a simple truth that left the decision entirely in my hands, and he held my gaze as he continued, quieter now, meant only for me, you walk out that door, and they go back to seeing what they chose to see, and I felt the words land, felt the weight of what that meant, not just for tonight, but for everything after, and he did not rush me, did not push further, just added one final sentence that settled into the silence between us like something inevitable, but if you stay, you do not stand alone again, and my breath caught slightly, because that was the choice, stripped of everything else, simple and impossible at the same time, and I realized then that this moment was not about him deciding for me, it was about whether I was willing to step into something unknown rather than return to something that had already proven it would never choose me, and for the first time that night, I did not feel small, I felt seen, and that made the decision harder than walking away ever could have been. The choice did not feel loud, it did not come with a sudden realization or a dramatic shift, it settled quietly, like something that had been forming long before this moment finally finding its shape, and I felt it in the way my shoulders straightened, in the way my breath steadied instead of catching, because for the first time that night, I was not reacting to what was being done to me, I was deciding what I would accept, and that difference mattered more than anything he had said, more than anything they had taken from me, and I glanced once more toward the door, toward the exit that had seemed like my only option just minutes ago, and it looked different now, smaller somehow, not because it had changed, but because I had, and I realized that walking through it would not be an escape, it would be a return to something that had already shown me exactly what it thought I was worth, and I could not pretend I did not see it anymore, I could not go back to not knowing. And that clarity settled something inside me, something that had been uncertain for too long, and when I turned back to him, there was no hesitation left in my movement, no uncertainty in the way I met his gaze, because whatever this was, whatever it meant, I would face it standing, not shrinking, not apologizing for existing in a space I had been told I did not belong in, and I saw it then, the slight shift in his expression, the almost imperceptible acknowledgement that I had made a decision. Not because he had asked, but because I had chosen, and it grounded me in a way I had not expected, because it meant this was still mine in some way, this step, this moment, this refusal to walk away quietly, and I spoke before I could second-guess it, my voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to be heard without needing to demand attention. I am not staying because you said those words, I said, not as a rejection, not as defiance, but as a truth that needed to exist between us, and he did not interrupt, did not correct me, just listened in that same still, deliberate way that made it impossible to ignore myself, and I continued, softer now but no less certain, I am staying because I am done letting other people decide where I belong, and the words felt different as I said them, heavier, more real, like they had been waiting to exist beyond my own thoughts, and something shifted in the space between us, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a quiet alignment, like something had settled into place exactly where it was meant to be, and he inclined his head slightly, not as approval, not as ownership, but as recognition, and that mattered more than anything else could have in that moment, because it meant I was not disappearing into his decision, I was standing beside it, and the room seemed to react in a way I could not fully see, subtle movements, careful glances, people recalibrating again, but I did not look at them, did not need to, because for the first time that night, they were not the ones defining what happened next, and I felt it in the way the tension in my chest eased, in the way my hands no longer felt like they needed to hold on to something just to stay steady, and he stepped back slightly, just enough to give me space rather than take it, and that small movement confirmed everything his words had suggested, that this was not about trapping me, not about forcing me into something I could not leave, it was about opening a door I had not known existed, and leaving it up to me to walk through it, and I realized then that whatever came next would not be simple, would not be easy to understand or explain, but it would be chosen, and that made it different from everything I had just walked away from, and as the music slowly began again, hesitant at first, like the room was testing whether it was allowed to continue. I remained where I was, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time, I had decided that leaving was no longer the answer, and that decision, quiet as it was, changed everything. The music did not return to what it had been before. It moved differently now, softer, more cautious, like even the melody understood that something in this room had shifted beyond repair, and I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, letting it settle, letting the reality of what I had chosen fully reach me, because it was one thing to say the words, to stand my ground in front of people who had already dismissed me, and it was another to feel the quiet after, the space where everything that came next would begin, and I became aware again of him beside me, not too close, not distant either, just present in a way that felt deliberate, and I realized that he had not moved to guide me, had not taken my arm, had not turned me toward any direction, and that mattered more than I could explain, because it meant this next step was still mine to take, and I let out a slow breath, steadying myself before I finally turned away from the crowd, from the tables and the faces and the version of myself that had walked into this place hoping to belong, and I did not look for Daniel again, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to prove something, but because I no longer needed to see what I had already understood, and that absence of need felt like the clearest answer of all, and I took a step forward, then another, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with a quiet certainty that surprised even me, and I heard it behind me, the subtle shift of movement as he followed, not overtaking, not leading, just matching the pace I had chosen, and it created something unexpected, not control, not dependence, but alignment. Like for the first time that night, I was not being pulled in a direction I did not choose, I was walking in one I had decided to face, and when we reached the doors, the same ones I had almost used to leave everything behind, I paused briefly, my hand brushing the cool metal handle, and I glanced at him, not for permission, not for reassurance, just acknowledging the presence that had changed everything without forcing it, and his gaze met mine, steady as it had been from the beginning, but there was something different there now. Not recognition, not exactly, but acceptance, like whatever he had seen in me before had just been confirmed, and I opened the door, stepping into the night air that felt sharper, clearer than the space I had just left, and the quiet outside wrapped around us in a way the ballroom never could, and for a moment, we stood there, side by side, the sounds of the city distant but real, grounding in a way that reminded me that life still existed beyond that room, beyond that moment, and I turned slightly toward him, because there was still something I needed to understand, something that had not been answered even as everything else had changed. You said this was about something that should not have been overlooked, I said, my voice calm now, no longer searching for control, just for truth, and he regarded me for a second, as if considering how much to give, how much to hold back, and then his gaze dropped once more to the bracelet at my wrist, that small, ordinary thing I had never thought twice about, and when he spoke, his voice carried something deeper than before, something that reached beyond this night entirely. That bracelet, he said quietly, it belonged to someone who saved my life a long time ago, and my breath caught, not from fear, not from shock, but from the sudden, undeniable sense that this was not chance, not coincidence, that whatever had brought him here tonight had been set in motion long before I ever stepped into that ballroom, and I looked down at it, at the worn silver I had carried for years without question, and for the first time, I realized I did not know its full story, did not know how it had connected me to something so far outside my world, and when I looked back up at him, everything felt different, heavier, more real, because this was no longer just about a moment of power or a decision made in a room full of strangers. It was about something that had found its way back to him through me, something that had been waiting to be seen, and he held my gaze as he added, quieter now but no less certain, I have been looking for that connection for years, and the words settled between us, not as a demand, not as a claim, but as a truth that extended beyond anything I had known before. And I realized then that this night had not just changed my place in that room, it had shifted the direction of everything that would come after, and I stood there, no longer wondering if I belonged, but beginning to understand that sometimes belonging is not about where you are accepted, it is about where you are finally seen.